The number of Ukrainians killed in the war is hard to ascertain as Kyiv does not release regular updates. But back in February, President Volodymyr Zelensky said over 31,000 soldiers and tens of thousands of civilians had lost their lives. Morgues across the country are struggling to cope with the influx, with thousands of bodies still lying unclaimed in many places. As DW's Sonia Falnica reports from the city of Dnipro in eastern Ukraine, identifying the dead presents both a physical and an emotional challenge. And a warning, some viewers may find the following report distressing.
The deliveries come 180 kilometers from the front line. Each one brings with it the smell of war and death. These are the bodies of soldiers. Most died in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The trucks come every day. Ihor Titarchuk runs the morgue here in Dnipro. It's his job to give the dead soldiers their names back. These refrigerated trucks were donated by charities when Russia began its full-scale invasion. They contain hundreds of bodies. There's simply not enough space inside.
We have 2 refrigerated chambers in the morgue, but they are designed for ordinary morgues in peacetime, not for wartime conditions. And their temperature regime does not allow long-term storage.
It's over 35 degrees here today. This one contains only body parts and small fragments collected on the battlefield.
Each body, each fragment. There's no template, there's no standard here. It's all very difficult, complicated and individual. The fact that there are orange tags in the refrigerator means that each number is a person. They remain here until the identity of the deceased is established.
That can take weeks, months, or even years. This is where they start the process of identification. Morticians take tissue samples for a DNA analysis, or a piece of bone if the bodies are badly decomposed. The staff have been putting in long hours since the beginning of the war. Titarchuk says no one has resigned despite the harrowing work.
In peaceful times, dying in a way cannot be prevented. It's a process. It's the process of life. It's natural. But the war and the deaths of all these young people and all others is not natural. And that's very tragic.
The morgue keeps a dossier for each body. Investigators collect photographic evidence of all distinguishing features, like tattoos, and any personal items found with the body. And yet, the focus here is to name the dead and provide families with answers. Victoria Harashenko is the woman whose voice families hear when they call the hotline about their missing loved ones. The phone doesn't stop ringing. She tries to match the information they give her to the bodies they have on file. Each detail could be crucial. Today, she spoke with a woman who recognized her son's watch and wedding ring. Even the sweater. Harashenko has asked her to provide a DNA sample for corroboration. But, she says, even when there is a match, it's often devastating.
The family isn't ready to receive such an answer. That he died, he's in the morgue. Sometimes they ask me, prove that it's him. I don't believe you. How did he die? Why did you decide that it was him? Why did you tag the body bag with his name? A person needs time for this. I take sedatives myself. I give the person time to calm down. Then I offer to call back when I stop crying.
In difficult cases, a DNA analysis may be needed. The facility has the latest technology to create DNA profiles which can be compared with samples from potential relatives. But sometimes the extreme violence of war complicates the scientists' work.
If the bodies are destroyed and DNA is degraded, then the work takes longer. We had a case at the beginning of the war when several fragments, 24 of them, were delivered from one place in one package. And we discovered 6 people in there, 6 soldiers. There were fragments of 6 people. It took us 1.5 years to identify all of them.
Complex cases like that can also end up here at the Criminal Forensics Medicine Lab. Here they use additional information, like the shape of a skull or a limb, to help confirm identification, especially in disputed cases.
Our main task is to give the body to relatives for a dignified burial, like a hero. That nobody should be buried as an unknown, unidentified person. Everyone has the right to dignity in life and the right to dignity in death.
Arguably, one element of that dignity is justice. The forensic scientists are also aiding investigations into war crimes. They try to establish how a person died and whether they were subjected to torture or inhumane treatment. That often involves working on bones recovered from mass graves or from fires.
In general, the number of such examinations will only increase over time, because those territories will be freed which are currently not under our control. There will be mass graves with remains. Those will testify to the crimes committed by the Russian Federation on our territory. The hostilities may end, but for our work, for us, the war will continue for a very long time.
Despite all the work by all the dedicated people in this complex, they cannot identify all the bodies. They're buried here, the Krasnopilsk military cemetery on the outskirts of Dnipro. There is a special section for those whose names have not been found. But even here, hope is not completely gone. The inscription says, "Temporarily unknown defender of Ukraine."
Andres Rodriguez Zorro works for the International Committee of the Red Cross and leads the organization's forensic team in Ukraine. Welcome to DW. Could you firstly give us a sense of the scope of your work? How many bodies still need to be identified in Ukraine?
Well, the estimations in Ukraine, as was already mentioned, is that more than 31,000 of combatants has died since the beginning of the escalation. And according to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, more than 11,520 civilians have been killed. But the most important thing is that these numbers are increasing day by day. The Ukrainian society is paying an incredible price due to the increase of these numbers. In ICRC, we are providing the support to alleviate this suffering and also providing answers to the families. And our support is very wide in terms of material assistance, in terms of capacity building, in terms of trainings. We are supporting all the procedures of search, recovery, examination, identification, storage of dead bodies, also the procedures of burial and the procedures of handover to the remains to the families.
International humanitarian law demands all parties protect the dignity of the dead. Is this fundamental right being respected in this war?
I will say that the Ukrainian authorities has been always very receptive, very open to receive our advice, our recommendations to follow the best practices in forensic medicine, in forensic sciences, in all the process, during the process of recovery, the process of examination, for the process of identification, to the notification of the results to the families. They are always respecting the dignity of the dead. They are doing the best effort despite the difficulties that they are suffering because of the lack of human resources or the damage of the infrastructures that they have also been suffering.
What about when it comes to the exchange of fallen soldiers between Russia and Ukraine?
ICRC has been invited to participate to monitor these operations. Basically, we provide technical advice. We also provide material assistance for to do these operations in terms of the vehicles, body bags, in terms of personal protective equipment, and we also promote the transfer of information that could be useful later for the process of identification.
How long are families in Ukraine waiting to hear about news of the whereabouts of their relatives who fought in the war?
Identification is a process, and it's a process that could be very complex. It was already mentioned that one of the main challenges are the status of preservation of the bodies. So there are bodies that are completely burned, fragmented, sometimes heavily decomposed, commingled. Also, the location, you need to understand that many of the bodies are in battlefields with a high level of weapon contamination. So the recovery is very challenging. There are also shifting of the front lines that also difficult. And in addition, it is important to understand that sometimes the families are not in the country. So the process of comparison of information from the dead bodies and the information from the relatives, for example, DNA, could be extremely difficult. So could be months or even years to identify a person.
And what about for your work and accessing the areas you need to do your work?
I will say that the access that we have for the forensic activities for the ICRC, for the International Committee of the Red Cross, is high. We have contacts with many of the institutions that are part of the medical legal system in Ukraine. We work in close proximity with the armed forces of Ukraine, with the national police. We work with the medical legal bureaus, which are the forensic structures under the Ministry of Health here in Ukraine. We work with the DNA laboratories. We work with local authorities, so I think we have a very good access level to support this system and to support the process of identification.
Interesting talking to you, and thank you very much for being on our show. The ICRC's lead forensic in Ukraine, Andres Rodriguez. Zorro.
Well, let's bring in Matthew Holliday. He's a program director at the International Commission on Missing Persons and joins us from Kyiv. Matthew, what kind of support does Ukraine need right now when it comes to identifying missing persons?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, it must be noted that Ukraine has many of the institutions and systems in place to account for the missing. It has its search groups, it has forensics, it's got DNA capabilities, a commission on missing persons and a law on missing persons. You know, a lot is being done by Ukraine and it's a superhuman effort. In terms of what needs to be done, I think we need to see the need for greater, closer cooperation amongst all these many different institutions that are engaged in the process. There's, I would say, a need for a centralized and shared database that can help facilitate a comprehensive process of identification, because many institutions are gathering many different pieces of information, and each of those separate pieces, if not pulled together, will not facilitate the necessary identifications that the families so desire. And also beyond that, mass collection of references from the families of the missing to facilitate those DNA identifications that the families so require. There are as many as 57,000 missing persons, and for each one, ICMP recommends at least 3 to 4 reference samples from close family members be collected.
Now, you have worked a lot on the armed conflicts in the former Yugoslavia in the past. Are there any lessons learned from these previous wars that help you now in your work in Ukraine?
I mean, I think first and foremost, it needs to be stated that the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia are quite distinct and very much different to what we see in Ukraine today and for the recent years. But there are, I think, some important lessons that can be learned. I mean, one is a rule of law approach to accounting for the missing is crucial. The criminal investigation is actually a driver of locating mass graves, exhuming the graves, recovering the bodies, and identification. So, rule of law and a criminal investigation is key. The use of primary identifiers is also vital, either DNA, dental records, or fingerprints to identify the missing. Use of secondary identifiers, such as an ID card that may be found next to a body, could be misleading and could lead to a possible misidentification. As I mentioned, the establishment of a centralized but shared database that pulls together all the data of all institutions involved is absolutely key. And I would also add to that, ensuring the engagement of the families of the missing in the process is also vital. Without the families, no matter what the state does, the process will be incomplete.
Now, talking about this process that might remain incomplete, sorry for interrupting you there, but one of the forensic experts in our report had said that his work would continue long after the end of the war. Do you believe that in time all families will learn the fate of their missing relatives?
The process will certainly be a long one. This is for sure. There's a huge piece of work in front of Ukraine to locate, recover, and identify the bodies of the missing. It does have the resources to do this. Whether all families will receive answers, that's unknown. Our sincere hope is, from ICMP's perspective, is that, through our support and the support of the international community to Ukraine, as many of the missing that can be found and identified will be. But this will be a long-term investment by Ukraine and by the International Commission on Missing Persons to make this happen.
Matthew Holliday with the International Commission on Missing Persons. Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you very much.